So I'm very excited about this. We're going to be talking about immune system optimization. That's really the subtitle up here. And there will be group participation. So write down in front of you, ISO. This is not International Standards Organization. This is immune system optimization. And when I ask you for an answer, that's the one to kick back my way. What you see here is me at work, and this shows that I'm using the means that exist already in our bodies to leverage health and wellness for you. Every day, I interact with patients, I give advice on nutrition, and I leverage innate functions in the body. So what does this really mean? This means that the innate component of our immune system is a nonspecific defender. The first thing that happens when a foreign body enters our body is nonspecific immunity jumps to the cause, okay? It defends us, and this is our defense perimeter. There's two types of immunity. You've got innate, which is what I just described, and then what's known as adaptive. And adaptive immunity comes into play whenever the body sees something that it recognizes. Maybe there's been a bacterial infection before, and there's a memory component of that stored in the immune system, and that exact bacteria, and when it shows up again, the immune system can then respond. We're going to talk today about immune system optimization. So why is this relevant to handle in a holistic fashion? It's because there's not any phenomenal ways to leverage cold and flu protection from a pharmaceutical end. So the flu shot is one endeavor, and its efficacy or effectiveness varies from season to season. This is very hard work. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has to try to forecast what the active flu or influenza bug is going to be, and then find that mix and apply it appropriately, because production needs to happen long before it's distributed. This is hard work. We're not throwing anybody under the bus here, it's just really hard to get it right. So let's take a quick second here, and I'm going to direct you to somebody named Kelly Brogan. She's a medical doctor, very bright lady, undergrad of MIT, some grad work at Harvard Med School, and she gives a great opinion here, and this is in the International Medical Council on Vaccination, that the flu vaccine is of limited effectiveness oftentimes. So why? Why are we talking holistic measures? Because they work very effectively. These little rugrats work great as hosts. So anytime we talk about an infective process, we've got that, and the virulency or the strength of that infective process is then battling against the host's immune strength. So what are we talking about here this morning? Immune system optimization, right? So what does this really mean? When I talked earlier about natural immunity or innate immunity, the concept is that this is a nonspecific defense. The first thing that needs to show up is that there's a foreign invader and the body mounts a response right away. There's a few things that play into this, though. This is a process that's dependent on nutrients and certain vitamins to be present, and it's a process that is negatively impacted by stress. And I'll explain a little bit more. This is a screenshot of a National Institutes of Health explanation, and this is fascinating. For those of you that enjoy science fiction, this will be fun because it's science fact. For those of you that don't enjoy science fiction, this will be fun because it's science fact. So in this case, we're describing, and this was discovered in March of 2008. Pretty exciting. If you'd seen me in March of 2008, I was driving around Forest Park on my bicycle screaming, "You viruses can't get me, it's too hot out here." I really didn't do that. Here's the effective message that's being sent here. The outside of the flu virus, the influenza, actually has a coating. And the outside, this coating is a lipid or a waxy lipid. Okay? What that means is this wax-like substance is very solid when the temperature is cold. And as it warms up, this waxy protective caspid layer, as it's termed, actually melts away. And this is the reason why we see more cases of the influenza when it's cold outside. It literally can't stand the heat. So in that case, the flu is present year-round. It's just much less virulent or effective in infecting us because of a physical barrier. And again, this was just discovered in 2008 with some follow-up work done in 2014. Fascinating, fascinating work. So during the flu season, the majority of respiratory illnesses actually are not influenza. And I'll tell you in just a second how to figure this out. Most of the time, the infective processes are the rhinoviruses. There's 3 different types, and we're going to give you a little bit, just a little bit, we don't have to go very deep into it, but a little bit of information about why this is important. Coronaviruses and parainfluenza are the other main types. Now, here's how you know. Is it a cold or a flu? If you get a bit of a stuffy nose, if you've got a low-grade headache, maybe a light sore throat, and you had it start to come on last night, but this morning you feel like it may or may not be there, later on in the day, our immunity drops a little bit. It's a functional component of our immune system. And you think it might be hanging on? That's a flu. Correction, that's a cold. The reason you know is when it's the flu, you think you got it, and 2 hours later, you know you've got it. This might be the big one, right? So, main differences. They both have headaches, sore throat, nasal symptoms. The flu comes on rapidly, and you don't have a choice. You're in bed, you're out for the count with the flu, okay? So rhinovirus C, there's a picture up here of rhinovirus C. Why is this important? Well, University of Wisconsin researcher and her team actually identified in, I believe, 2007 that this rhinovirus exists. Rhinoviruses A and B are pretty clearly understood, and in fact, there are medications out there that are antiviral and can effectively match it. But what was found on rhinovirus C is the outside, the differences are in the details here, the outside covering of the virus actually differs as the virus transcribes. What this means, a virus is basically a parasite. It jumps into a cell and it releases RNA and or DNA, depending on the virus, and then it hijacks that cell. All of a sudden, this parasite is embedded in the cell, and when this hijacking occurs, the outside of the cell membrane changes. Well, with rhinovirus C, that transcribes differently every time. So it's very difficult to mount an effective pharmacological answer to this. Our answer is immune system optimization, because that works every time. Okay? This talks a little bit about it. This is the Journal of Virology. Anybody read the Journal of Virology in here? I'd be concerned if you did. Infection and propagation of human rhinovirus C in human airway epithelial cells. Epithelial is anything that covers our body or lines the inside. There's only 4 tissue types in the whole body. This is amazing. Your entire body is made up of one of 4 tissue types, and epithelium covers or lines everything. So think airways, think digestive tract, and then on the outside of us, our epidermis is epithelial tissue. Now this is where it gets exciting. No, really. But wait, there's more. So with epithelial tissue, one of the functional factors that we can do that drastically changes the way our epithelial tissue responds from an immunological standpoint is making sure 2 vitamins are present, okay? Vitamin D is really more of a hormone, but it's called a vitamin. So vitamin D needs to be at an optimal level. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. And then vitamin A. These 2 factors mitigate the immune response at the level of the epithelium. And where's the epithelium? It's everywhere. So let's take a second and talk about this. Vitamin D, I mentioned it's a hormone. With vitamin D, we now recognize that there are receptors for vitamin D on every cell within our body, okay? And the immune cells are a perfect example of this. Anywhere there's a receptor in the body and vitamin D can bind, it's modulating or changing the way that's functioning. From an immune system standpoint, what does this mean? Check your vitamin D levels. Have your physician check your vitamin D levels, because there's a great test that will give you reliable information. I'm going to share a little insider secret with you. When we test these, they're almost universally low. Is this a conspiracy to sell more vitamin D? No. It goes back to the fact that the vitamin D is actually a prohormone that's converted into a hormone by sunlight. Many people think, oh, I think I get that from sunlight. That's true. That prohormone in your body is converted. There's something that's interfering with the hormonal function. We see this in society with disease states, but there's something that's interfering with hormonal function, and vitamin D, as a result, is low in most people that are tested. Not everybody, just like 97%. And so what you're going to look for is a number that's anywhere. They measure it in nanograms per milliliter. It's a standardized test, and you want a number that's anywhere between 50 and 70. Okay? Between 50 and 70, that's going to optimize immune function. Lower than 50, got to ramp it up. Okay? If you just want to know, and I can't give medical advice to a whole group, but hypothetically speaking, most people are safe with about 2,000 international units a day of vitamin D. Until you get it tested, that would be a good starting point. The other factor that drastically increases our immune system function is vitamin C. Now, this is pretty common knowledge. In fact, this is marketed quite aggressively, but it's absolutely true. Vitamin C boosts something called glutathione in our body. If we want to know what's fixing a problem in our body, a good guess on a multiple choice test would be glutathione. If you drank too much the night before, the liver's cranking out glutathione. If there's a cold that's trying to take over, glutathione's being used. So this is our most powerful antioxidant in our body. And vitamin C is a precursor, meaning it helps us build glutathione. So, what are we all about here today? Immune system optimization. Beautiful. I love it. And the two most effective things from a vitamin mineral standpoint, both of those are vitamins/hormones, are vitamin D and vitamin C. Vitamin C is a water-soluble element, and so you can't have too much of it. You'll know if you do because you're making a lot of trips to the bathroom, but you're safe at about 2,000 milligrams of that a day. So 2,000 international units of D, 2,000 milligrams of C, but do get the blood test on the D because you might need as much as 5,000 or 10,000 international units to really get immune function up and on board. Talk very briefly here. If we divide this in half into an upper and a lower half, this helps us determine what is categorized as an upper respiratory tract infection or lower respiratory tract infection. So we have all these names that end with itis, which means inflammation, right? We've got, well, and then we've got pneumonia, kind of the standout. But bronchitis, laryngitis, tonsillitis, many times these are colds that take place that will irritate a given part of the body. When an airway, in this case, these are all airways or sinuses. When an airway is blocked from congestion, there's an opportunity then for bacteria, which normally live in those areas, to fulminate or grow into an infective process. Okay, so here's the connection between a cold, which then requires some type of antibiotic. Let me stop for a quick second, though, and tell you, antibiotics have no functional reason to be used with a cold. And the reason is this. I explained earlier that a virus is a parasite. It jumps into a healthy cell and takes over the function. Antibiotics, for the vast majority, work by inhibiting the cell wall of the bacteria. And then your immune system comes in and cleans up house. And so when you take an antibiotic for a bacterial infection, it's poking little holes in the bacteria's ability to build that outside wall, and as a result, the immune system, optimization, if it's happened, comes in and cleans up. With a virus, it's jumping into a healthy cell we have already. An antibiotic is completely and totally ineffective at helping with a virus. And the reason I get so passionate about this is antibiotic overusage is a big problem. It's actually causing drug-resistant strains of antibiotics. And when we really do need those wonderful life-saving tools, we need them to work, okay? So pressure shouldn't be put on prescribing doctors. If you have a cold, I've got some recommendations. It's all built around. Thank you so much. So before symptoms appear, here's what you can be doing. It's cold and flu season. Maybe your spouse, a loved one, child. I have a 5-year-old. Little inoculator is what she is, and the love of my life. If they're around and they're sick, start implementing some of this. One of the biggest things you can do is just reduce sugar intake. And this is huge because sugar is actually immunosuppressant. It really does. It knocks down the effectiveness. So that's one of the first things you can do. Optimize vitamin levels. And do we know what levels to check? C and D, right? C, you can't get too much of it, or you know when you do. And then D, have it checked. Have it checked. And then controlling for stress. Now, how does this work? Very, very quickly, I'll tell you this. Antibodies are important in this whole immune system picture I was painting for you. Most of the time, they identify the foreign invaders, and they mark them. Antibodies are proteins. When we're under a lot of stress, our body goes into a state called a catabolic state, which means instead of building, it tears down. So under stress, the body is in catabolism, and it's breaking down and using proteins not to build antibodies, but to try to do cellular repair because the stress is tearing things up a bit. So controlling stress, therein lies the connection between getting majorly stressed out and getting sick the next day. It actually has to do with how the body preferentially shunts those antibodies and the proteins that they truly are constructed from. So let's talk for a moment about this. What does this look like? Sugar intake being reduced. 50 grams of sugar is actually a lot of sugar from a functional medicine standpoint a day, but you want your consumption at less than 50 grams in order to optimize immune function. There's a few other things that we're going to talk about on our next slide, and this is, what do I do when I start to feel sick? Okay? First slide was what's happening when someone in my perimeter is feeling sick. But first signs of a cold, take action. You can boost immune function, and there are very reliable ways of doing this. The vitamin A that I mentioned earlier, around 5,000 international units, is a very safe and efficacious dose for ramping up those epithelial cells and their ability to excrete protective factors through 5,000 international units of vitamin A. Beta-carotene is a natural example of this, and if you're taking it in that form, there's a conversion and some process loss. It should be taken, if you're getting carrots and trying to juice carrots to create this, 25,000 international units of beta-carotene will translate to about 5,000 international units of A. So what's that mean? Run about 5 carrots through your juicer, and that's a good start. And then rest. So important. Like I said earlier, if it's the flu, this isn't a decision. It's been made for you. Business is getting shut down, and you're going to just take a rest. But if it's a cold, you engage the protective immune function and you rest, it makes a huge difference. Let's talk briefly about that boosting immune function. I want to give you 3 different things that are reliable, safe immune boosters. Now, do consult with your health professional. Feel free to email me and ask a question. I'll customize the answer to you. But the 3 compounds are astragalus, okay, astragalus, and I will, what's the best way I can do this? Feel free to contact me and I will respond in an email where you can have all these things spelled out. But astragalus is the first compound, Panax ginseng is the second, highly effective, and the third is echinacea. Echinacea, Panax ginseng, and astragalus. I got to tell you, this is what I use to stay well, and I have plenty of folks trying to inoculate me. The last thing is, after you've thwarted the attack by the cold, because this can happen reliably and it works the vast majority of the time. You can stop a cold in its tracks. It can take you partially offline for a half a day, as opposed to setting in and taking you out of commission for the whole week. When we look at this, limiting sugar, this needs to continue. 50 grams a day, again, is a little more than I'd like to see, but that's what the research supports. Optimize vitamin A and D, and prioritize quality sleep. Start thinking about, boy, where did I get offline where the restorative function of my body almost let me get sick? And I got to tell you, if you're doing the top 2 and you prioritize quality sleep, it fixes a whole lot in the body. So let's just recap for a moment. And in doing so, I want to just introduce this paper from the National Institute of Health on vitamin D and in the immune system. So you don't have to take my word for it, although I appreciate it that you were. I could tell. In this case, vitamin D can modulate the innate, adaptive, and adaptive immune responses. So the innate immunity that I talked about, any foreign invader is dealt with, vitamin D optimizes that. The adaptive component, where the immune system learns about a past invader and is prepared to knock down that entity should it try to enter again, vitamin D optimizes that. And if we could read farther, we'd see that vitamin D also downregulates autoimmune style attacks. So this is a big component. The immune system is so powerful that a big portion of its job is identifying non-self, meaning outside entities, from self. When there's confusion in that, that's called an autoimmune response, when the immune system's attacking self or us. Is this a problem? This is a huge problem. If we look at the 3 top threats to our health, we've got heart disease and cancer. Why doesn't autoimmune show up as the 3rd threat? It's because it's so diverse. Sometimes it's named lupus, sometimes it's named Hashimoto's syndrome, sometimes it's named Cushing's syndrome, sometimes it's called celiac disease. If we lump all of the autoimmune issues together, it actually accounts for more healthcare dollars being spent than cancer. Astounding. Vitamin D, proper immune function, powerful. I'm going to open for questions right now, and then I'll close the lecture in just a few minutes. Fred.
Are you suggesting not to get a flu shot?
That's a very personal decision. I want you to discuss that with the prescribing physician. I want you to understand that the flu shot is highly, highly beneficial for the manufacturers of the flu shot and questionably efficacious for the individual receiving the shot, depending on how accurate the CDC was in their forecasting.
I know there's people who never get it who don't have flu also.
That's true, yeah. And what we do find, if we do some research, what we can find, it generally shows up on about the second page in the search engines, and now thanks to Will, I understand why. But around that second page, you'll start to read some of the details from forward-thinking doctors like the one I referenced earlier. And they have seen behind a curtain that involves some benefit being conferred upon organizations that might say flu shots available today. I will get excited when it says, come in for a lecture on how sugar is negatively impacting our entire society today. I haven't seen it yet. Well, you might see it in front of my practice. Thank you for the question. Yes, John.
I just had a quick question on, about 2 years ago, my wife and I started doing in the wintertime,
Yes.
I'll start next month,
Yeah.
doing a saltwater nasal nose flush.
Yes, often called a neti pot rinse.
Whatever that is, yeah.
Yes.
She bought these containers for us.
Yes.
So we do that once or twice a month, December, January, February.
Yes.
Is that something you would recommend?
I do recommend that. Neti pot can be used, or nasal saline rinse can be used. This is part of Ayurvedic medicine that's been around for 3,000 or 4,000 years. They've been doing it, so they've got some stuff figured out there. The benefit of using the salt water is that makes it isotonic, meaning it doesn't try to draw fluid out of your cells. That hurts. Feels like the ocean going up your nose and that kind of burning sensation, or cause something happening in the opposite direction. So isotonic is the reason for the salt water. You want to use the little packets that are pre-measured, or about a 1/4 teaspoon is the amount you use in most of those little jars. But that's a great thing to do. Rinse about once a day. When somebody's sick, they'll be tempted to do that more, but the problem is that mucosal membrane, the inside of that epithelial membrane, is trying to ramp up immune function. So if you give it a good rinse in the AM's a great time to do it, then you're off to a good start, and you let your immune system get a fighting chance.
Yeah, 2 questions about
Yes.
sugar. So 50 grams a day?
Yes.
Can you relate that to, is that like a half a soda, or is that
Yeah, okay, so the great question. That would be about 1.5 cans of any given soda that is sugared. Right, and definitely don't be taking artificial sweeteners. That's a 5-hour lecture. But if you must have soda, just go light on it and go with the real stuff, preferably cane sugar.
sugar is I've noticed, as I grow in age, that my body's reaction to eating a big-ass piece of cake and a bunch of ice cream
Yeah,
is much more severe than it used to be.
Yes.
It's just like, oh, I can eat this all day long.
yes.
Now it's like if I eat that, I feel hungover the next morning.
You know, it's true. And what happens, this is the biggest thing, when we facilitate dietary change for folks, which I spend a lot of time doing and trying to do, when we do that, folks become sensitive and they realize, they say, this bothered me, it didn't used to. Well, that's a good sign. Your body's finding a balance. And let me explain very briefly why. The cortisol that circulates in our body is an anti-inflammatory. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly important. But cortisol is released from our adrenal glands that sit on top of our kidneys anytime we're under stress. The fight or flight response is mitigated by this. A large consumption of sugar, what do you know? It actually causes a release of cortisol from the adrenal glands. So your body perceives it as a stressor. And I'll say this very briefly. If sugar, let's say historically it didn't exist. This is a utopian society for me. No, I have a sweet tooth. I'm a recovering sugar addict. So if sugar didn't exist and it were just formulated, now, put before the FDA and said, is this safe to feed to the populace? It would be regulated as an addictive substance because it has addictive qualities, and its level, it would come out with a recommended daily allowance which would be much lower than what's accepted now, because it possesses the factors of an addictive substance and one that does in fact cause us ill effects. So great commentary and question. Yes. Are we up? Thank you so much. So let me just briefly show you this. This is what? IS. That's right. So we're going to boost immune function and have it identify, and it's got the virus in its crosshairs. Reduce sugar intake, optimize your vitamin levels, boost immune function with the 3 compounds I mentioned earlier, control for stress, and rest. Thank you so much.